All right, we are finishing up day 3. Today we're going to be filling out the trig sheet, which is the big sheet that has all the trig ratios for all the possible special triangles from 0 to 360 or 0 to 2 pi. We learned most of what we needed to do to fill it out last time. This time we are just going to add our quadrantal angles. So how do we find the trig ratios for those angles on the x and y axes? So quadrantal angles are the angles on x and y axis. That means 0, 180, 270, 360, 90. Don't want to skip that one. So here we have our axis, and we kind of use this is the beginning of what's called the unit circle. So it's a circle, first of all. Second of all, unit circle, so we notice we're basically drawing the radius as a 1 unit in length. And so if you look at the coordinates at 0, you have, it's really hard to see, but this is 1, 0, this is 0, 1, this is -1, 0, and this is 0, -1. So these are the coordinates we're going to be using to find our trig ratios for our quadrantal angles. So remember, if you remember, as I have over here, the opposite adjacent sides are found assuming a side lengths of 0 or 1. We use the x and y coordinates of a point 1 unit from the origin. So remember, the adjacent basically is equal to our x coordinate because that's this side, and so this point up here is, this is our horizontal distance, our x coordinate, our vertical distance, or the length of the opposite side, is our opposite. So our opposite side length is going to be defined by our y coordinate, and we're going to use these coordinates as our opposite and adjacent lengths. So what's our hypotenuse? Because if you look, they kind of look like they don't have any, and they don't really, but if we assume that we have kind of a flat triangle and we were going to find the hypotenuse, we're going to find it the same way using Pythagorean theorem. And I could take any one of these points, I'm going to get the same hypotenuse. It's going to, let's say I'd pick this one, it's going to be the square root of a -1 squared plus 0 squared. The square root of 1, which is 1. So the hypotenuse is always going to be 1. So if we use these coordinates as our opposite and adjacent, and I'll mark these as well. So this is adjacent, opposite, adjacent, opposite, adjacent, opposite, adjacent, opposite. Hypotenuse is 1. If you can remember that, and I know it's kind of a lot to remember, but hopefully you can remember that, then it's easy to find your trig ratios. You're just going to use SOHCAHTOA and use your adjacent and opposite numbers along with your hypotenuse, and you have your answer. There's just a few little things you need to also remember when you're doing that. All right, so if we look at the x-axis, so here's our x-axis, I have it highlighted there. And we've got two angles. We have 0, well actually we have 3 angles. 0, this is 0, 360, and they're going to have the same values. And then 180. So SOHCAHTOA, if we look at the sine of 0, when I do that, okay. If I look at the sine of 0, it's opposite over adjacent, or opposite over hypotenuse, which in this case our opposite is, lost that. Our opposite is the y coordinate. Let me put this here, opposite, or adjacent, opposite, adjacent, opposite. So our opposite is our y coordinate, which is 0, and our hypotenuse is going to be 1. So it's going to be 0 over 1 or 0. The cosine is going to be adjacent over hypotenuse. Our adjacent is 1 over 1, which is 1. Tangent is opposite over adjacent, so 0 over 1, which is 0. Notice our cosecant. Our cosecant is hypotenuse, which is 1, over opposite, which is 0. Whenever you have a 0 in the denominator, it's undefined, and that is, in fact, the value for cosecant of 0, it is undefined. If you tried to put it in your calculator, you would get an error. Secant is hypotenuse over adjacent, which is 1 over 1 gives you 1. Cotangent adjacent over opposite. So again, you get 1 over 0, which is undefined. And likewise with 180, except you're going to use these coordinates or those lengths for your opposite and adjacent. So here we have opposite over hypotenuse, which is 0 over 1, which is 0. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. It's a negative 1 over 1, which becomes a negative 1. Tangent is going to be 0 over negative 1, which is 0. Cosecant, hypotenuse over opposite, which is undefined again. Secant hypotenuse over adjacent, which is negative 1. And then lastly, cotangent adjacent over opposite, again undefined. So they're very similar. You'll notice the only difference really are your negative values here, where you went from the positive x-axis to the negative x-axis, and that caused your adjacent or your trig ratios that use the adjacent side to change sign. All right, so now we have the y-axis, which is your vertical axis, and it's going to be really exactly the same. We've got our 0, 1, we've got our 0, negative 1, our hypotenuse is equal to 1. And so let me fill these in. It's very annoying that this tool sometimes doesn't show my bars, but okay. So now our adjacent is going to be the 0 length, and our opposite's going to be the 1 or negative 1. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse, which is 1 in this case. Adjacent is going to be 0 over 1, which is 0. Tangent opposite over adjacent, so our adjacent is 0, so this time our tangent's undefined. Cosecant hypotenuse over, and this is 90 degrees. Hypotenuse over opposite, which is 1. The secant of 90, hypotenuse over adjacent. We have 0 in the denominator, undefined again. Cotangent is going to be adjacent over opposite, or 0. 270 is going to be very similar, except our opposite is negative 1 instead of 1. So we've got negative 1 over 1 for the sine. Cosine of 270, 0 over 1. Tangent of 270, again, we have a negative 1 over 0, which will be undefined. Cosecant, this is negative 1. Hopefully you can see that. Secant is 1 over 0, undefined, and cotangent is 0 over negative 1, which is 0. So those are the quadrantal angles. So now you know how to find the angles on the trig ratios for your axes. You know how to find your, hopefully you know what your special triangles are, and you know what to do with angles in different quadrants. And so you will be filling out the trig sheet as your final task. And you're going to fill in missing values. You'll notice that at the top that there are missing angles, either in radian or degrees, and you'll need to fill those out, as well as all the missing trig ratios in the middle. Bring your questions to class.